This is what I'm trying to do in my everyday job. What I like normally in these conferences is that I can listen to people who don't talk about my daily job. So I try to give some insight into the strategic aspects of cybersecurity and cyber warfare, and how attackers and how defenders can allocate their resources. In order to do that, I'd like to show you a little bit about how people think about what I will use to attack and target, why I choose a target, and how you should consider their strategies and their tactics to have a better defense against them. So first of all, one of the major issues that I would like to raise is that there is a kind of attacker that we usually forget about. In the slide up there you will see 4 basic types of attackers. You have the hacktivist, who normally has political reasons to attack something. If it's a left-wing activist, they will attack a bank. If it's a right-wing activist, they may attack some kind of a religious target or a government target. Anyway, they have a political aim to do that. So what they seek is to distract connectivity with a DDoS attack, and to get publicity. You have other types of attackers, like the cyber criminal, who has a very easy target to get some money. And another one that he's not caught at the end. So he would like to disguise his presence in your systems, but only until the very point of time when he gets his money. You have the cyber terrorists, who would normally seek destruction and publicity at the same time. They would like to know that they did it. If you don't find out, they will call you. I did it. I destructed your system. And the special type that I would like to talk about today is as I call it, the cyber operative, who is most probably an intelligence officer somewhere, a military officer somewhere. You may have seen these pictures about the Chinese. I don't know the number of that squadron, but they have these many hundreds and thousands of people sitting in a big room and hacking other people's systems in military uniforms. So you can imagine these kind of guys. Interesting thing about them is that they would like to be destructive, but only at a later time. So what they would like to do is to maintain their capability to attack you. They don't want to be caught. They don't want to necessarily use this capability. They just want to hide in your system. They want to have more than one backdoors that they can use. So even if you find one of their malwares, they can go back easily with a second one. And when the time comes, when there is, again, a political reason, just in the case of the hacktivist, they would like to be able to very quickly build up an attack against you. Like you saw it in Ukraine in 2015, when some guys switched off the electricity. You may have seen it, and it's very frequently cited in Iran, when people just switched off some nuclear facilities between 2008 and 2010. So the main reason why they are different is that their first aim is to have the capability, and it's only a secondary to activate it in the necessary time. And where it all comes from, I don't know if you have read those articles about a comparison between the Stuxnet attack in Iran and attack against gas pipelines in Russia or the Soviet Union in the 80s. There were, in the Stuxnet years, there were a lot of articles about this old 80s years attack when illegally the US sent some forged plans to the Soviets. They used these forged plans to build their computer system, which was meant to operate their gas pipelines. But at the very end, these pipelines just blew off because the system itself was intentionally bad. And this was one of the first cyber strategic offensive attacks from the side of the US. But in the 80s, also the Soviets had the same plans to destruct the critical infrastructure of Western Europe and the United States of America when there is a military situation between the two sides. The basic thought behind that was that there will be no nuclear Armageddon on the first day, because the 50s and the 60s, it was an easier time from a tactical point of view. If there is a war between the two sides, on the first day, all buildings will disappear, all the people will die, most of your military capacities will be ruined, and the guy who has the last tank standing wins the war. So maybe that's why the Soviets built so robust tanks. You may remember everything from the Soviet Union was quite robust. But this changed in the 80s, and from the 70s through the 80s, these countries started to prepare for military situations where you have a longer period of conflicts without nuclear attacks against each other. So you will have a long period of time where you have to, with your normal weapons, you have to attack the other side, and you have to be faster than the other one. And to be faster than the other one, you have to destruct their critical infrastructure that they would use normally to mobilize their forces. So what were the usual targets for the Soviets? They would have capacities to attack military reserve units. They would have capacities to attack industrial suppliers of military forces. They would like to have capacities to attack power and energy resources. They needed capabilities to destruct transportation facilities, airports, naval ports, and so on. And they would also need attack capabilities against administrative control centers. But if you just take a look at these possible targets, they are all connected to the internet today. They all use computers, which they most probably did not in the 80s. So the way I was thinking was that if there was a Soviet Union today, yes, it is no Soviet Union today, so would they use cyber weapons to support their normal military capabilities when there is a conflict? Of course, they would. Problem is that conflicts today are a little bit different than they used to be in the 80s. What we prepare for now is not a traditional military situation that comes before the nuclear Armageddon, so like 2 weeks before. Rather, we have these kind of hybrid conflicts which are characterized by a mix of military, intelligence, economic, propaganda, and cyber, and the deployment of cyber assets. You can see this in Ukraine. You can see this, I think, in most of the conflicts for years. What is very interesting and what makes a big difference between conflicts of 30 or 20 years ago and today's conflicts is that the two sides in a hybrid conflict, they do not necessarily want to have more territories in the traditional meaning. What they want to have is more dominance, more leverage. They want to be more influential on how the whole conflict is perceived in the world. And for this, they don't necessarily need to really destruct critical infrastructures. What they need to do is to maintain a feeling that they could do it. Is to persuade you that they have the ability to do this. And this goes in tandem with what I mentioned about cyber operatives, that they want to have capabilities. This was also the situation in Ukraine in 2015, when the electricity grid operator was attacked, which of course was not meant to cause 20 days profit loss for that particular operator. It was much more intended to persuade Ukrainian people that they are in the hands of the Russians. And if they want to do a blackout, they can do it easily. So whenever you are fighting with them, they have the ability to do this, to do that. You could remember the Aurora Gold project, so that I don't just mention the Russians. It was the NSA who infiltrated a lot of telecommunication operators in Europe. You may have seen it in this or that leaks. It was a very interesting one. They had a capacity to intercept the conversations of telecommunication operator administrators in like 80% of Europe. And also, in a hybrid conflict, you could use these capabilities to paralyze or distract telecommunication systems, like it happened to DIN a few years ago, when most of the internet traffic was paralyzed on the eastern coast of the US. So these offensive cyber assets fit into this landscape. They are very easily usable in such scenarios. Those cyber operatives who you should consider as attacker, and most of the time we do not care about them, they will use these capabilities and they will try to build up these capabilities in the long term. So whenever they have such projects, they can just switch them on. It is very important to see that these attacks will not necessarily destroy your equipment compared to a bombing, for example. But you will need to be able to recover in a very short period of time from such attacks. That's a big difference. And in this way, cyber attacks will never substitute traditional attacks or traditional capabilities like an air force, because with an air force you can traditionally destroy a building. With a cyber attack you can stop it from being functional, but it can be, most of the time, it can be rebuilt. So what also changed since the 80s, it's not just the scenarios where people use these technologies, it's not just the type of attackers or their aims, it's also the technology. So in the 90s, the 90s was a big change for the people of the world using computers. It was the first time when there was a consensus that big amount of the, a large share of the population should use computers at home. If you remember the 70s or the 80s, it was not that easy. I mean, you could buy some types of computers, but it was not so easy to import computers from Western European countries. You had to steal it from Western European countries and bring it to Hungary, and it was not just by chance. It was intentional. If you give hundreds or thousands or millions of computers, mobile phones, anything, in the hands of the people, that means that they have, for example, encryption capabilities that were normally only affordable for militaries. You will give them computational capacities that were used in the 70s or the 80s to control missiles. Now, in your iPhone, you have maybe better computers than anyone had in the 60s to target a nuclear bomb to your city. Okay, the other thing that happened, there was a consensus that this is a good idea. So in the 90s, we gave the computers to all the people, but there was a consensus that the nation states should stay in control, so that whenever you give a new technology to the large public, it should be interceptable, it should be controllable, so that nation states still have the control over this process. The 2000s changed this picture a little bit, because What we did was that we connected all these equipments. It was not just single standalone computers in our homes. It was a full bunch of networks. Everything is connected with everything. And the speed of technological change accelerated. So it was already uncontrollable from the nation-state level. The consensus that was built up in the 90s was over. What the big countries started to do is they started to ban technology from their territories. You may remember TPM, TMP, Trusted Module Platform, that was banned from Russia and from China. This is something that you use every day in your laptop today. But in the very first day, these two countries didn't want to let this technology enter their countries. And what happened then is that they started also to disrupt their operations through leak campaigns, I would call that. They wanted to make the publicity aware that the other side has this or that capabilities and you should be paranoid about them because they will intercept you, they will go after you, and they thought that the more information they leak about each other's capacities, they will elevate the barriers for the other side's capabilities. But at the very end, the result was quite different. Because in the 2000 years, which is the third period, what is at least I think, or this is what I would like to raise today as a point, it became visible that these mutual leaks at the very end did not lead to take away each other's strengths. Rather, what happened was that we gave a lot of very developed technology to cyber criminals who can use them against us. And the reason for this is that we don't patch our systems or we don't develop our systems as fast as the technologies leak. So if there is a new malware which was developed by, I don't know, KGB or FSB, successor, or NSA, or MI5, or MI6, or MI any number, like the next day it was leaked, it will be used by this or that cyber criminal. But can you patch the computer system of a critical infrastructure operator in 1 day? Or can you do it in 1 year? You have patch windows like 50 minutes a year, or maybe half a year. So you are not able to stop and maintain these systems as fast as these technologies develop and as these technologies are leaked to the general adversive public. Other thing is that it is much easier to build new offensive assets. The jumping cost, which used to be quite high, today is quite low, and it helps also the other side. And as we had a consensus of nation states in the 90s that you can have highly developed technology in your homes as long as it stays controllable, such consensus is not in sight today. So we don't know when the next consensus will be born and how they will and what it will contain and how these diverging processes will become manageable in the short term. Another aspect of protecting critical infrastructure from these attackers under this situation is what the cyber operatives, who we usually don't consider in our risk assessments, we consider APTs as a whole. It can be anyone. It can be a criminal or anyone using the technology. But most of the time, we don't consider the actor behind it. So what cyber operatives have to think of, what kind of technology they use when they want to attack a critical infrastructure provider. They want to do that, as we talked about it, to support their military. So when there is a time to attack, they have the capacity to stop your critical infrastructure. So they have to choose an asset. They have to choose an instrument to do this. They have 3 major types of assets. And I will start with type 3, which is publicly known technologies. So already you have a lot of leaks. You have a lot of information about possible malwares or technologies, exploit kits that you can use. And if on your target is not, they don't have all the security updates, their network has a lot of leaks, you can use more or less automated tools to find their vulnerabilities. You can make use of that, and you can exploit these vulnerabilities. And you can do this without really very special type of knowledge. You can do this with knowledge that you can gain in a matter of years. And you can train your people in like tens of thousands of your people to find these holes and use these technologies. Very easy for them. Type 2 is a technology that is not known to the public, but the attackers, that is these military institutions or intelligence institutions, they know they exist. They know that most probably the other side also has it. Maybe they have intelligence on who has it and who don't have it. But they are aware of the problem, and but they have to think of that if they start using it, the other side will use it too. So they have to be cautious on what targets to choose, because if the other side has it, they will realize that I'm using it, so maybe there is no point in it. And type 1 is a type of technology that I believe only I have. So this is something you can think of zero-day exploits. You can think of side channel attacks that were not revealed before. You can think of capacities to control points of a supply chain where you can embed your offensive technology. So these are a very limited amount of unique technologies that are unique to you, that you believe as an attacker that only you have this kind of opportunity to attack. And when you start deploying these technologies, you have to do a risk assessment. First, you have to know what are your goals. You have to have long-term capabilities. So it's not just that you try with maybe your best, your type 1 technology, and if you fail, okay, no problem, I will try it with type 2, type 3. Then you have to have a plan that provides you long-term capability. You have to be successful. But if I start to use type 1 technology to the wrong target, they may uncover my previously unknown technology, because these technologies are, of course, not fully tested. They do it, quite undercover, so they can just go and test it in all the systems, all the versions, and so on. There are restrictions to them. So they will really have to make a choice. What are those targets where they really want to have these long-term capabilities and that are worth risking their best technologies? It's clear that, for example, the nuclear facility in Natanz was such a target where the Stuxnet was used, which was really a unique technology those days. And it was worth doing it. I don't know if you remember those days. There were serious discussions about the Iranian nuclear program in Vienna. And the biggest question was not if Iran wants to have a nuclear weapon, it was when they will have one. But it's so easy to stand in front of them and discuss this problem with them if you have a switch that you can give plus 1 year to this point of time, because this was what Stuxnet was meant to slow down their nuclear program. So it was clearly an important goal to risk your best technology. But you can't risk your best technology to all the cyber infrastructure operators. You have to make choices. And of course, you will have previous information about the awareness of these operators, their preparedness, their vulnerabilities, how much they invest into cybersecurity, and of course you will try to use most of Type 3 technology as much as you can to targets that are easy to attack, and you will try to use your Type 1 technology for those targets that are the most important to you and that are the best developed against attacks. So how you can trick them is that you think the other way. You have to take in, as a defender, you have to take into consideration what can be the most important to the other side, and try to build up your defense system so that they will have to use their best technologies to attack especially these targets. And if we do it, and you don't just think of one cyber infrastructure operator, but a whole sector of cyber infrastructure operators. So if all of them think this way, then the other side will, they will run out of these Type 1 technologies. If you consider the last leaks of NSA, they had like 20-some exploits to use for a specific telephone. So then if you have 28, or like they have 27 Type 1 attack technologies, and you have 28 targets that you think they will attack, then you can have at least one where they won't use it, because they don't want to use it for duplicate attacks, so that they don't double the risk of being uncovered. This is the way that when you build up your defenses, you should think. Problem is with that we don't have really much trusted information on how adversaries, like we are standing in a NATO country, so like our adversaries in Russia think. First, what you need is trusted information about their strategies, what targets are important for them, what are the attack vectors that they usually use, and what is their tactics in maintaining these capabilities, that is, keeping covered in your systems. So how they move, how they build up their attack campaign, their attack strategy. Other problem you face is that even if you know how to what to do to harden your systems, it's very hard to stop a critical infrastructure operator, because as it is critical, it was meant not to be stopped. So to have redundancies, to have capacities, to have financial assets, to build up redundant capabilities, it's very important to become able to get less vulnerable. On the other hand, you have a competitive business environment, because this is a second very important attribute of critical infrastructure operators, that they are at the same time kind of a factory that sells products, and at the same time they are a target for a military operation. So even if in the cyberspace. So if you want to survive in a competitive economic environment, you have to reduce your costs. You have to use modern ERP systems, BI systems, and all those regular IT systems that a company would normally use to control your costs, to control your logistics, to control your everything. But to use them, you have to have integrated systems. To have integrated systems, you have to connect everything to everything again. We work with critical infrastructure operators. We see how much operational technologies are, for this reason, connected with traditional information technologies. You want your SAP to see all your production. When your colleagues go to the factory, what they do there, when they start working, when they stop working. So you connect a lot of your industrial equipments to your SAP, but your SAP you connect to some kind of cloud, or your mother company, which may reside somewhere in Western Europe. But in the end, you have a lot of interconnected systems. Part of them, they belong to the operations. You are not meant to stop it. It's very hard to maintain. And part of it is normal IT. And you have to have a cybersecurity framework that is able to cover both the operational part and the normal IT part of the whole. But going back to the other, the previous slides, it's not very easy to do. To be capable of defending yourself against type 3 and type 2 and type 1 attack technologies at the same time. What happens at the end is that your team who is responsible for protection, gets fatigue, and they will be like, okay, I can do it. I understand what you're saying, but believe me, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm doing a lot of audits. We are a critical infrastructure operator, so a lot of people are coming to us because of the NIS directive. They try to, look into what we do. Government people come. We have the GDPR, so we have to take care of your more personal data. I have privacy audits, and I'm not doing this at all because I don't need N+1 audits on the same year. Most of your guys in a cyber team, they will be allocated for these kinds of jobs and not what they are really meant to do. So what would be important to use an approach is that keeping silos, keeping distinct part of the organizations, not talking to each other, is a big problem. Because if you see an attack, if you find a malware that is attacking one part of your organization, there is a risk that it will attack another part of your organization. So if the two parts don't talk to each other, and if you have two teams, two cybersecurity teams, if they don't talk to each other, if they don't share information, you have a bigger probability that the attacker will be that the attack will be resultful. But for critical infrastructure operators, this communication should not just happen within the organization. Most of the times, one of the CI operators relies on another CI operators. The classic example is an airport who needs electricity. So if I have an attack as an airport, I may be ready to not talk about it because people don't like to come to airports where there are cyber attacks. Maybe it's not that safe, they would think. But if I don't tell this to the electricity grid operator that I depend on, then even if I survive the attack, they may fall. And then I have an airport without electricity. Of course, I have some generators, but you understand my point. What is a problem and is something that should be changed? Of course, these kinds of conferences is very good to do that. And of course, the certs are the organizations to facilitate and accelerate this kind of communication. What is a mindset that should be changed is that normally when you start developing your cyber defense capabilities as a CI operator, people normally think of, regulations and legislations and threats like cyber criminals or activists who might want to attack their facilities, but most of the time they don't think of these counter-operatives who have these strategic and tactical scenarios in their minds. Why this is important? Because then if you use the wrong threat sources to your risk assessment, then the whole will be false. And the very basis of how you build up your protections will be built up to not the right risks, not the right risks that they should be built to. So one of the big changes that is needed is a change in mindset. What is technical parts of the solution that we see is working is if you use multi-purpose information security frameworks, which you can use to reduce your risk assessment costs, your compliance costs. They can be very useful because most of the companies have to comply with different requirements. But if you have one integrated risk management framework that can be used to fulfill all these requirements at the same time, they can be mapped to different requirements. It is very useful to not be allocated for this task all the time. It is very useful to have automatic cyber security enabling systems like a CM or a SOC. Maybe there are people who know much more about this in this room than I do. And also it's very, so the cost level of jumping into buying developed anti-APT technologies is getting lower and lower. The new generation security devices that you may buy most often contain this or that part of this technology. It's very important to build up a system on what information you will share within the organization and with your suppliers and with the certs and with the government, of course based on requirements of the law. But you have to build up this information sharing component of your cybersecurity infrastructure so that you can have real-time information sharing. It's sometimes not useful to have this information days or weeks after the event happened. You have to be as close to real-time as possible. And the national and EU response teams will be a big help. And also the EU is building up a response team that will coordinate the work of the national certs, and it will be a big help to critical infrastructure operators in this sense. So basically this is what I wanted to share with you. And at the end I would like to give some recommendations that could be joint goals for both governments and CI operators, which is it is important to take steps to elevate these barriers, to make it harder on the national level for the attacker side, so for cyber operatives, to use cheap technology against them. We want to make them allocate their best developed technologies against us so that they can't use it in many places. We will, in this way, you can make them make bad risk assessment decisions, so it helps uncover their capabilities. It is important to share information about the type 2, so not public, but uncovered technologies of the attackers. This way, if you share this information, your whole supply chain will become more protected from these technologies. It is very important to increase R&D capabilities in type 1 technologies. This is something that is not visible in Hungary. We don't really have this kind of capabilities. So zero-day exploit research is something that is not widespread in Hungary. Side channel attacks is something that, for example, those guys are doing research on in the crisis lab in the next room. But it's, again, it's something that's not widespread enough anymore, not widespread enough in Hungary. This is something where we could have much more insight on. And if we had much more insight on, it would be easier to integrate these issues into our cyber protection frameworks and systems. It is very important to get real-time access to threat information at certs, but even if the certs provide real-time information, you have to be capable of, this information to arrive to your systems. You have to be able to receive it. If you're not able to receive it, even if they provide it to you, it's not useful. So when you get new information about malware, you should be able to update your firewalls, update your malware protection systems in a very short period of time or real time. What is a recommendation is to implement state-of-the-art integrated cybersecurity systems, so framework, so you don't have to have a different framework for this standard, a different framework for that, a legal requirement, and another one for, I don't know, your bank. So for PCI DSS, because you have bank cards, you can have one integrated framework that can serve all the legal requirements and all the industry standards that you have to comply with. And the last one is, it is very important to get more support for those small and medium enterprises who are not considered as critical infrastructure operators, but still they supply them. And I think in the last few years, in a large majority of in the cyber attacks, the first point where the attacker entered the organization was not the organization itself, it was one of their suppliers. But if you consider cyber critical infrastructure operators, you think of big companies. You think of big factories, electricity grid operators, transport systems, telcos, and so on. But most of the time, they have a bunch of SMEs who work for them, who are connected to their systems, who have remote access, maybe to their operational technology as well. And they are kind of a gray or a white spot from the cyber protection point of view. This is what I wanted to say to you today. If you have any questions, the next presenter is missing. I didn't do that. It was not those guys, those operatives. So I'm here. You can just ask me questions or we can talk about it. Thank you.